My name is Patrick McGann. I'm the Director of Strategy and Planning for Men Can Stop Rape, and I'd like to welcome all of you to the 7th conversation in Men Can Stop Rape's National Healthy Masculinity Conversation Series. In 2012, Men Can Stop Rape organized and launched the multi-year Healthy Masculinity Action Project, reaching more than 60 million people and igniting an international healthy masculinity movement. It was really the first time that healthy masculinity had been paid attention to in a national way. And now it's really an international movement. And I'd like to take a minute to share what else Men Can Stop Rape does before we jump into the conversation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Men Can Stop Rape. And if you know Men Can Stop Rape, you might know that we were founded in 1997, so we've been around a long time, and we actually have our 25th anniversary coming up in 2022, and we're excited about that and are planning some exciting things for that. But you might also know some of our signature programming, especially the Men of Strength Club, which has been around since 2000, so almost since the start of the organization, and WISE, which is Women Inspiring Strength and Empowerment, which was named by the women who were in that club. They're complementary clubs, and they both pay attention to socialization around gender, and they really is our award-winning, especially the Men of Strength Club is our award-winning youth development program. It's existed in DC since it started, but it's also now in 28 states, and it has a 24-session curriculum that provides middle, high school, and college-age males with a structured and supportive space. And you see counter stories there too. That's what we call a Community Strength Project. And that's led by members, created by members. This is a film project that they worked on, and it's really an exciting thing to watch them really take the lead on those community strength projects. We also do some federal work as technical assistance providers. This is for Office on Violence Against Women, and they're consolidated. What's now consolidated, it's really Children and Youth and Engaging Men program. It's been exciting to work with a lot of community organizations through that. And then we have our Healthy Masculinity resource bundles, which provide a number of different kind of comprehensive resources depending on where an organization or campus or agency is in terms of trying to do healthy masculinity work, whether they're at the very beginning or whether they really want to take some significant steps and develop further what they're trying to do. And so those are really helpful resources. And then we've been doing public education campaigns for a long time, since 2000, 2001. With My Strength is Not for Hurting campaign started out. This is our most recent Where Do You Stand, which is unique in the sense that it focuses on both bystander intervention and consent, and it does positive role modeling, which has always been essential for us in public education campaigns. And then Ask, and You Ask, Assault Services Knowledge. Those are two different apps and web platforms that combines all the sexual assault services in one place for both citizens and students on campuses, so that if something happens, you can easily look up where to go, or if, whether it happens to you or to somebody you know. And then the DC Coalition to End Sexual Violence played a key role in leading that, along with the DC Rape Crisis Center. And you might have come across, or certainly there were a number of online showings of Nameless, which was about child sex trafficking in the DC region, but really also in a much larger sense as well. So we do a lot of different things. That's not all of them, but it gives you a little bit of a taste of who we are and what we do. And so I want to also say that we're doing this series of conversations which provide space to continue discussing how healthy masculinity can best be used now and in the future. How do people understand and effectively use healthy masculinity? How successful have we been at spreading healthy masculinity to multiple areas of social activity? And what will healthy masculinity mean for the 2020s? And so this is an ongoing series. And one of our staff members actually is going to post a link to make a donation if you'd like to support the series, or you'd like to support some of the work that we do, especially through the MOST and WISE clubs and working with youth. You'll be able to do that, and we certainly would invite it, however much you feel like you could contribute. But it's not necessary, but it's certainly welcome. And I'd also finally like to mention, right before we start the conversation, if you have any questions, you can feel free to tweet them to Men Can Stop Rape's Twitter account, at Men Can Stop Rape, and use hashtag HM series or hashtag healthy masculinity, or you can just post a question in the comment section on the YouTube site where you're watching the video. So either way, we'll deal with questions about the last 10 minutes of the conversation. So let me stop sharing the screen and I'd like to bring up Jane Palmer and Greerlin Thomas. Jane, we had the absolute pleasure of working with on this project that we're going to talk about and that the article is based on. And I don't, there's certain times where I don't know what I would have done without her, especially in terms of the evaluations components. So she was a huge help. And Jane, if you just take a minute to introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you, Pat. So my name is Jane Palmer. I'm at American University, where I'm a professorial lecturer and the director of the Community-Based Research Scholars Program. Prior to becoming an academic, I was worked in youth development, youth violence prevention, child sexual abuse, sexual assault, and domestic violence advocacy and intervention, and I was the director of a feminist Duluth model batter intervention program prior to deciding to become an academic and college professor. My research focuses on preventing sexual violence, help seeking, bystander intervention, and sort of how we do better in our legal and policy responses to gender-based violence. And I worked with Pat and Greerlin and Men Can Stop Rape as an evaluation consultant on this project that we'll be talking about today.
And I would say, Jane, too, that you're an expert. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but really an expert at the campus climate surveys in relation to sexual assault.
Yes, I didn't mention that, but
yeah.
I've been doing a campus climate survey at American University since 2011, biennial survey. So I've been involved in that work for a long time and provided some consulting to other campuses in this network related to that as well, because of my experience in that arena.
Yeah. Greerlin, why don't you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Greerlin Thomas. I'm a training and technical assistance program manager with Men Can Stop Rape. Before joining Men Can Stop Rape, I was actually in one of their mental strength programs in high school as a veteran MOST club member. Also attended the American University for undergrad, for graduate school to get my master's in literature. And I also worked on the HHS project that we're going to be talking about today. I worked on pretty much every part of it, working with students, working with universities, organizing the collective meetings, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, thank you. All three of us worked together on the article that appeared in Health, Education, and Behavior. So I think, why don't we start there just in terms of the conversation, just from their eyes. People have had, we made that link available, but not everybody might have read the article. So Jane, if you could just explain a little bit about the article so we can make sure that everybody's at least a little familiar with it.
Sure. So for the most part, the article, as the title indicates, focuses on the benefits and challenges of a regional network. So those of you who are familiar with the anti-sexual assault and anti-domestic violence movements for the last few decades, cities have really focused on coordinated community responses and sexual assault response teams, which were a huge addition to the work that was being done so that folks are collaborating and talking about working together to address the issue in different ways, whether it's a coordinated community response or a sexual assault response team. They're a little different, but they have similarities. So a lot of campuses in the last several years have implemented something similar where public safety and the Dean of Students Office and the advocates on campus and faculty and students groups all get together and sort of make sure coordinate prevention and intervention services. So with this project, what we hoped to do and what Men Can Stop Rape coordinated was a regional network where there was 9 campuses throughout the region that we won't be naming today because in the article we kept them confidential so that the folks who were interviewed would feel comfortable sharing their thoughts with us about the benefits and challenges. But the 9 campuses came together to coordinate resources and ideas and strategies and get support from one another. So in the article, we talk about the extent to which this initiative really helped those bonds and helped campuses make connections outside of their campus to really move forward some of their initiatives. What benefits they got out of it, what challenges they saw, and then we talk a little bit about something called social exchange theory, which is an organizational development theory to really frame how networks like this, if you're thinking about starting one, what helps them be most successful from that organizational development literature. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that theory later, but that's the basics of what the article is about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And for me, I think one of the things, just in terms of the project, separate the project a little bit from the article. I think we conceived of it as a regional network from the beginning, but I think there were 4 organizations. Men Can Stop Rape was really leading 4 organizations that, as I thought of it, it was like primarily we were going to be providing technical assistance to these 9 campuses. And so we were going to be doing different workshops and trainings and both on campuses and both for all the campuses together. And that we certainly started out that way, but one of the things that became clear was that the campuses really wanted to engage with and talk with each other as well. And in fact, that was just as valuable as engaging with us as the technical, quote, technical assistance providers. And so, you know, in that sense, I think that's really when the social exchange theory kind of kicked in, that we'll talk a little bit more about. But it really was important for them to kind of not only share resources with each other, but also trust each other enough, and that took a little time, trust each other enough to you know, share about what was really, you know, what's going on their campus, what they're struggling with, their perspectives on different things. And it was really, that was one of the most exciting things to me to see to develop over time, was that kind of, those kinds of relationships, which again fit very much within kind of the social exchange theory. And but we're going to take all of this and try and work to fit it within a kind of healthy masculinity framework. So you know, it's good to probably start by talking a little bit about the healthy masculinity work that was done as part of this project. So Greerlin, maybe you could share some of that.
Yeah, so a lot of what we did for this project, just in terms of the day-to-day, involved really sort of coordinating with the different campuses, the different colleges, universities, which meant, you know, in many cases, traveling to them, trains, buses, things of that nature, meeting with their CCRs, which are the coordinated community responses, if they had them or the closest thing to them, explaining what the project was, how we could be of service to them, what the benefit of this thing that they had signed on to is. And then further from there, we would, sort of advise them and sort of provide them with technical assistance around training opportunities, particularly as it related to healthy masculinity, our expertise in our area of expertise. That also meant encouraging them to engage people on their campuses that they didn't traditionally engage in these kinds of conversations around gender-based violence and sexual assault and according to community responses. So maybe that meant that they would engage the athletic director where they previously hadn't. Maybe it meant that they would engage Greek life. Maybe it meant that they would engage the RAs in a different way that they traditionally did. So a lot of our advisement was about getting them to reach out to people who were stakeholders on campus who could maybe provide them with ins for different groups on campus that they didn't traditionally get involved in or hadn't in the past found a way to get to come to their different events. It also meant supporting the events that they did. They'd have events on campus and we would boost them, give them materials of our own. And then we also had many, I'm blanking on the word, but all the campuses got together basically every couple months. And just sort of, there was a different topic at each one. So sometimes it was about the most effective way to reach out to people on campus around different issues as it related to informing them about like the existing policies around sexual assault on campus and sexual misconduct. Sometimes it meant brainstorming different ideas for bystander intervention programs and things of that nature. I think we had one that we invited, I don't know if we've talked about this quite yet, but we had a technical advisory group, which for our project, because every project was mandated to have one, for our project, our technical advisory group, or TAG, was students at each of the 9 campuses. So one of the group meetings that we had involved bringing representatives from all 9 campuses in their different offices together alongside those 9 TAG students, sort of talk about the things the students were recognizing and what their feedback was about the project and like their individual experiences of their university as a whole.
Yeah, and I thought TAG was, and there was 1 student from each campus, so there were 9 students, and I think the longest they were a TAG member was 2 years. Is that right? Or
yeah, that sounds
right.
right.
I think the longest TAG student we had was 2 years.
Yeah, but I thought it was actually one of the most exciting parts of the project, and one of the things that, like, similar to the staff who came together, I think the TAG students also came together and really they have a much more kind of rare opportunity to do that. So I think either for them to be on calls with each other or for them to kind of come together in person, it seems like they were even more excited about that than the staff.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really great benefit for that, for those students, especially the young men who wanted to connect with other young men that were working on these issues on their campuses. If they felt sort of alone in the work, they had someone at another campus that was also trying to do the work. And they really learned from each other and got ideas from each other about different events to put on or different initiatives to advocate for on their campuses. So I think that was definitely a huge benefit of this project.
Yeah, that's my sense as well. Greerlin, why don't we get a little more specific and talk a little bit about some specific, I'm thinking of, so we went, initially we did, as we do a lot, an online webinar, or I think it was an online webinar, we didn't do it in person, just on what is healthy masculinity. We also traveled to a lot of campuses to do healthy masculinity trainings for peer educators or other groups. And we did some workshops as well. We also did, maybe some of the people watching are familiar with the campus conversation, healthy masculinity campus conversation, but some of the campuses familiar with that, but then they took their own, they took the idea of it and did their own twist on it. So maybe we can talk about a couple ways that that was the case in terms of, I'm thinking about the barbershop one.
Yeah.
Maybe you can talk about that a little
So
bit.
we did a number of things on the different campuses. You know, like you said, in some cases it was just training their peer educators around like our approaches to healthy masculinity, so giving them additional tools to use in their own trainings that when they would go around and do them. And we did that at, I think, each of the universities in some capacity.
Yeah.
And then, you know, like you said, we have campus conversations, which for us is a model where we, you know, bring the campus together to talk about a particular topic, usually related to healthy masculinity. And there are storytellers who come in and they tell a story as it's related to the topic. And it's sort of a sparking off point for a larger conversation. So there's small group discussion, there's large group discussion. It really brings the campus together and allows them to have some rich conversations. And, you know, we did that at a number of the universities, and some of them were content to just have it as a one-off, and others, you know, liked the idea so much that they did a series of them. So we had, you know, one university that, you know, one year decided it would be an interesting idea to sort of have one that kind of, as a way to draw students in, offered free haircuts as well. So that became a really interesting conversation, and it was such a hit that they did it again the following year, without even much assistance from us, actually. You know, they told us they were planning to do it, and you know, wanted to know if there was anything we could do to support. And we're like, yeah, sure, of course. But, you know, you really want to see that sort of thing where, you know, you bring a campus an idea and they really run with it and sort of institutionalize it in a sense.
And you were there for all of those, some of those? I can't remember.
Yes, all of those. I was there.
All of those.
I was there for the first one.
So did anything stand out?
I helped facilitate the first one.
That's what I thought.
I was able to just sort of be in the room for the second one,
which is nice because that's the idea, right? But did anything stand out? Was there anything that was memorable in terms of those conversations?
The activity itself was the conversation itself was a collaboration with two different departments within the university, which I thought was really interesting. And they were ones that hadn't traditionally collaborated. They had found it a little bit difficult to sort of navigate having to find the time to collaborate. So that was nice that they were able to do that with this project. And then the conversation.
Greerlin? And did you get a haircut while you were there?
The second time I did, yes.
Oh, great.
I'm missing that now, actually.
Yeah, right. Yeah. We all need that kind of event right now.
I am not. I also, I'm thinking about, so, you know, everything took a little bit different shape. I think everything, there's still, they all of them had healthy masculinity at the center. I'm even thinking of the workshop on healthy masculinity and consent, which one? The one that you and I went to. You really did it in the network without naming the college, and I think that was also of an opportunity for a little bit of growth on our part, in terms of really doing a workshop that focuses on consent. But so maybe you could talk a little bit about that one as well.
Yeah, so with that one, it was interesting because we had been invited to give a presentation to one of the campus's men's groups. And so we did that and they really enjoyed it. And that men's group has itself become kind of institutionalized on different campuses within that sort of like network of colleges, or that university network. And so we did it 1 year at one men's group in this one campus, and then the next year we did it at a different one. So I got to sort of see different campuses and experience different versions of the same sort of men's group. And one was more insular. The first one was just the men's group, whereas the second one was an invitation to the entire campus that was sponsored by the men's group. So that was nice as well. And it's always very interesting to see the students who show up to these sorts of things and how interested they are in these conversations, because there is actually a lot of interest, I feel like, on campus for all these kinds of conversations, but they don't really know where to seek them out or what are the best places to go to learn more. And so being able to do that is very nice.
Mm-hmm. There was also so there was a different work on campuses, and then there was also bringing the campuses together for training. So I'm thinking about the athletics training.
With that one, we encourage the campuses, so it's representatives from each office that we were working with, and sometimes the offices are, they're different offices. Sometimes you're working with people who work in Title IX, sometimes you're working with people who are members of the CCRT, sometimes you're working with people who work in whatever is the campus's like approximation of a student's response office or something of that nature. We invited them to speak to whether it was a coach, athletic director, somebody who worked in sports on their campus, and encourage them to come to this meeting where we would sort of talk about what it would look like for these different departments to collaborate around the issue of like sexual misconduct, and bringing trainings and education to athletes and engaging them as potential student leaders around this issue.
Mm-hmm. And I also, I think, Jane, this connects a little bit to what you were talking about and thinking about young men doing the work. And this is, I probably should have brought this up earlier, but I think it's important to bring up, so I want to bring it up now, that one of the things that we also did was some of the campuses already had You Ask, which is the app I was talking about earlier in relation to campuses. And then we spread that to some of the campuses also in Maryland, Virginia, but so that there are more campuses in the network who had that. And I think more young men who could download and have easier access to that information, which in some sense, I think one of the challenges I think is always young men seeing sexual assault as an issue for them as well. So I think any of the ways that we can communicate that this is an issue for all of us, and that we would connect that with healthy masculinity in the sense that those divisions don't really exist, and that young men are involved with the issue just as much and should be involved just as much as anybody else with the issue. So there were lots of different ways we were really kind of approaching this, and campuses were using it in their own ways. And I'd like to think of this as I wouldn't say it was necessarily. It's not like we were doing, okay, this is the healthy masculinity work all the campuses are going to do. It wasn't constructed in that kind of way, because we recognized that the project really wasn't constructed in that way, because the campuses were so different from each other that we recognized that there's not going to be any one way of doing something that was going to suit all of the campuses. But I think we can think of it as, in some sense or other, a comprehensive approach, in the sense that they were all working on healthy masculinity. They were all familiar with at least our approach to healthy masculinity, and then taking their own kind of ideas and really doing it in a way that made sense for their campus. Jane, maybe you don't have any information about this, but at least from what I know in terms of research, a comprehensive approach is really fundamental towards really cultural change, changing social norms. Is there any kind of information or ideas about that you have that you might share?
I mean, yeah, that's really it, that everyone sort of has to be on the same page for the change to be made, which is why these coordinated community responses or sexual assault response teams on campuses are really important. I've been involved with the university where I'm at has a coordinated community response, and I've been involved since 2010. I think it started in 2009. And I've seen, this is, separate from this conversation, but I've seen incredible change in those 10 years because people started talking to each other, and because people started meeting regularly and communicating about what they're seeing, the advocates saying, hey, public safety, you can't do X, Y, and Z. And public safety being like, hey, we really want to be at the table and learn how to do this better, or that, right? Because when everyone's working in silos on this issue, there isn't that sort of coordinated community response, hence the title, right? And so that's really important. And then if you think about the region, if we bring it back to this conversation with the article, we have students who hang out with people from other campuses. We have colleges that might be a feeder school to other colleges. We have students who might transfer within the region. I can think of examples just of students I've known as a professor that have done all of those things. And wouldn't it be great if all campuses in a region or nationally, we could talk about, we're sort of having the same conversation, so that when you're at a party, or, you know, I don't want to be so stereotypical that all this stuff happens at parties, but say you're at a party with other kids from other schools or young people from other schools, you all sort of have the same sort of reaction to a potentially risky situation. And you're all thinking about bystander intervention strategies or ways in which to interrupt unhealthy masculinity. And that there is that social norm piece around it. I mean, that's what the research says, right? That with any social issue, like we can all, well, I think a lot of us can remember life before seatbelts, for example, or being able to smoke on an airplane. Like, we're able to change social norms, and we can do this in this arena as well. And we have, but there's still more work to be done.
Yeah.
But the more people that are talking about it and saying the same things, or sort of on the same page about it, the more change we can make.
Yeah, which goes back, and I think it's such a crucial point, that it's both within a campus and across campuses as well. And the more kind of we can create those conversations across campuses, I think that's just as important. And I think a lot of times gets overlooked. I think there's a lot of state coalitions with, you know, there are coalitions within states, more typically work with, say, rape crisis centers, domestic violence organizations. But I don't think the idea has really transferred yet to campuses in a significant way. I know
not in the same way, yeah.
Not in the same way. I know there's some coalitions that, for instance, work with a collection of campuses in the state, but it's not on a regular basis. You know, and part of the challenge, I think, is that you know, who does it, how do you do it, where do you get the funding, all those sorts of things.
Right. Well, and one thing I want to say too, related to that, is another really good benefit from this regional network is the ability for people within their campus to say, hey, I was talking to so-and-so at X university and they're doing it like this, and I think that might be a better way for us to do it. And colleges, my experience has been, is that colleges are kind of always looking to see what the Joneses are doing, or the analogy would be. And if they hear another campus is doing something, they're curious, especially if it's sort of like what they call a peer institution, or well-known institution. They're more willing to try it out. And so you can use it to try and push things forward at your own university. So it's not just like, oh, I have this idea. It's this, oh, these other universities are doing this and it's working really well. Let's see what we can do here. And if we're not communicating about what campuses are doing, which is something that Campus Climate Surveys has helped with a little bit, we don't have those new ideas or innovative ideas outside of the geographic area of our own campus. And the sort of ideas within our own campus can get a little stale over time.
Yeah.
We've heard as much from,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
We've heard as much from representatives from the campuses who've told us, or who've said in meetings, your university doing this makes it much easier for me to go back to my bosses and say, hey, this campus over here just tried this and it worked out for them, and they're, like you said, they're like a peer university. So they said, it makes it much easier to leverage those kinds of changes to an administration.
I also, to your other point, I think in terms of really social norms, and I think people, when you go from one campus to another, and I think this regional network covered about, was it 70 miles between, something like that.
The largest distance, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was the largest distance. So I think, the idea of when you go from one campus to the other, and the idea is, oh, okay, they're doing healthy masculinity work here too, or here, or wherever I go, whoever I talk to, if this comes up, it's familiar, and the conversation is much easier to be had, I think, when that's the case. So I think there's value in it in that kind of way. So let's talk about. I think maybe this is the time to talk a little bit, which I think connects with social exchange theory. And Jane, I don't know if you want to go into that a little bit more or talk about it a little more in depth, because I found it to be a useful framework.
Yeah, I'll be brief because I don't want to do in the weeds, but there's a few different permutations, but in the one that we relied upon to apply to this network had three main pillars: rules of exchange, resources of exchange, and social exchange relationships. And we've sort of touched on most of these in our conversation thus far, but I'll just make it a little bit more concrete. So rules of exchange is, for example, in this project, there were MOUs that are memorandums of understanding, excuse me, trying not to over acronymize things. Memorandums of understanding that some partners felt helped them stay engaged because they had signed off on this agreement. But it also, beyond that, lays out expectations so everyone's clear going in what the expectations are for people's involvement, for ways people can play a role, meeting schedules, stuff like that. The resources of exchange, one example of that is having funding from the federal government for this project that helped Men Can Stop Rape coordinate it and plan the meetings and go to the campuses and provide the technical assistance. But I would say another resource was the people on the campuses, the staff and the students that were doing this work. It was sort of a resource of exchange in that we had some folks who have been doing this work for a long, long time, some folks who were brand new, but both have great resources in their sort of either experience or the new person with the new ideas that we need to listen to and figure out if there's a way we can do something different. So that was sort of another resource, is that information sharing among the entities on different campuses, the staff and the students. And then the last thing, which I think was a really important part of this project, is social exchange relationships. And that is the work to build rapport and trust across campuses. I wouldn't say that the campuses came in really distrustful necessarily, but I think there did need to be some work. At least I'm a very relationship oriented person, and I need to do a little bit of that small talk, and I need to, like, I don't know, just not go right into business to get to know someone, and then I'm a little bit more committed. And I think generally people are like that. And so having, you know, coffee hours and other ways for people just to chit chat helps build rapport and trust. And then also seeing people show up again and again also builds trust, and, you know, saying, oh, we have a curriculum on that. Let me share that with you. Maybe it'll be helpful for what you're trying to do on your campus, instead of being really guarded about, you know, your proprietary information. It's like, we're all trying to end sexual assault. Let's figure out how we can share resources and build relationships to do it better on our campuses.
Mm-hmm. And you know, I'm just thinking of it, hearing you talk about it, and I don't know that I thought about this exactly before, but hearing you talk about it, it seems like it's a useful way to think about the genders working together too and building trust in terms of each other. You know, what's the foundation we need to kind of build in terms of the rules of exchange? You know, how do we interact with each other? Like, for example, for us at work, I think, and we were just talking about this staff a little bit earlier in terms of some of a meeting that we had. It's called BART. And maybe Greerlin, you could talk a little bit about BART.
So BART, we use internally at our organization: boundary, authorities, role, and task. And it's just a way to sort of understand what everyone's sort of limits and expectations and opportunities are, and how we are supposed to interact with each other. You know, where when one person's authority ends and mine begins. You know, where opportunities for collaboration. When is it time to hand something over because it's no longer your responsibility per se? It's someone else's job to take on that task. And so for us, it helps to organize us around really understanding how we work together. And so we sort of bring that idea to our interactions and with the different campuses as well.
And I think
That's what
well,
you're asking about.
yeah. Well, and I think it's an example of rules of exchange, right? It's not it didn't really play a key role in the project, but it could have. But you know, more typically, we establish the rules of exchange through like a memorandum of understanding that was connected with the grant and other expectations, logic model, things like that. That were, you know, built in collaboration with the campuses. And then, you know, the resources of exchange, I think they started sharing things that were going on with them in terms of the campuses. I know two of the campuses were collaborating to put on a significant conference, a fairly large conference, which again, we did some healthy masculinity work at there, but they were in a position to, I think, more easily let all the other campuses know about it because they had this regional network that they could reach out to more easily and attach names to people on the staff. And as Jane was pointing out, have relationships with some of those people. So I think all of that comes to play.
Sorry to interrupt. If it's what I'm thinking of, that was partly inspired by something that our tag students did. Our tag students wanted to come together to have a sort of convening where they invited other students from their individual universities together as well to talk about things they would like to see from the different universities, ways for them to move forward and collaborate. And you know, people who weren't even involved with the project heard about us having put that on and were very inspired by the idea. So again, thinking about the way that, you know, this project has sort of helped to spark other things at these different places.
Well, I want to talk about TAG a little bit more in depth because I do think, again, it was inspiring for me, and I felt like it was really meaningful to the students that participated in it. And it was a little bit different. None of the other tags consisted of all students for the other grantees, so felt like it was a little unique in that perspective. From that perspective. And I also felt like it did what Jane was talking about earlier, that it both presented the opportunity for young men who were involved in this work on their campus to engage with others from other campuses and see that, oh, I'm not the only young man working on this, which again is reinforcing and powerful, I think, and important. But I think the other thing it did is also help people see them as the counter story in terms of what we call the counter story. It's like, oh, young men can do this. Young men do care about this, which, you know, runs counter to what we would call the dominant story in many ways, that this is not an issue for young men. Greerlin, maybe you could talk a little bit about, and if you can't, that's fine, I'll do it. But if you remember the young man who was peer educator at one of the campuses who actually came to a training we were doing for staff from the other campuses. I don't know if you remember that at all.
Oh, yeah.
And he was he a tag student?
There were a few different, because I feel like that young man showed up at more than one.
Yeah, he did.
And it was partly because the office that we were working with at that university was also collaborating very heavily with their peer educator program, which he was in. So he really got to see.
She couldn't show up to the training.
Right, like she couldn't show up for one, so he showed up, and so got a really different side of the project. And then there was another meeting where, you know, he also was there as well. And I don't even think that that young man was actually a tag student.
That's what I was trying to remember.
I think that he was just very fortunate to have been able to see that side of the project, which, again, you know, one of the benefits of TAG is that students get a very different perspective on what their universities are and you know, are trying to do around sexual misconduct.
So it extended even beyond actually TAG. So the students were involved in some other ways as well. And it just struck me how much the staff person who asked if he could come in her place, and she was uncertain about it. It's like, oh, well, we asked about this before in another circumstance, and they said no. We said, sure, of course he can come. And I think it was both meaningful to her and meaningful to him in the sense that um, it gave him a different kind of feeling about the work that he was doing, I think, which he was then able to take back to the other peer educators and communicate, I think, that, oh, what we're doing is important. We have something to contribute, not just on our campus, yes, on our campus, but it's even larger than that, I think. So it validated him and them in a way that I don't know that we particularly anticipated when we said, sure, go ahead and come. But I think that was one of the interesting things that came out of the interview for me that we had with the staff person from that particular college. So, but it did, in terms of TAG, I mean, you had a lot more interaction with TAG than I did. So maybe there's some things you can share about it that stand out.
Yeah, so it's made up of students from sort of all walks of life, so to speak. You had students who were more engaged around these topics to begin with. So some of them were already working with these offices in some capacity, whether it was, interning with them or they were official staff in some capacity. In other cases, they were it was advertised on their campus, and they saw the advertisement and they decided they wanted to get involved. So you had students who, for the first time ever, were sort of getting involved in work around sexual violence and sexual assault, who were getting a really sort of crash course in a lot of different things that are happening on their campuses and the work that's being done to deal with it. So you had all these students who were communicating with each other over emails, over phone calls, getting to meet each other in person a few times, doing different projects. We assigned them different projects that were specific to the universities. So for example, we had them create infographics around sort of what their campuses were doing and the different services that are being offered on their campuses as a project. I think that was one of the last projects we did with them for the last year of the grant. Other projects were just to sort of get involved directly with a project that was happening on their campus for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So they sort of got to participate. And for some students, again, because they were already doing this work, that was a very easy lift. And for other students, it was an opportunity to sort of get to see a different side of what was going on their campuses. And the thing that they gave us, the feedback that they gave us in terms of how they appreciated TAG, was that they really got an opportunity to, like you said before, not just see what the other campuses are doing, but see what other students were doing on those campuses. And so they were inspired by other students. They would, we had students who said that they heard about an idea for an event from one student from a different campus and repeated that event on their campus because they thought it was so brilliant. And that was a fairly common thing of like being inspired by the other work that was happening. And so we had a variety of, young men and women. We had people who really just brought so many different kinds of creativity and knowledge to the project through the TAG students. So I agree with you, Pat, that I think that was one of, if not the best part of the project.
Well, and I think that not only was it exciting for them, but I think it was exciting for us in the sense that their voices became important in a way that, again, at the beginning of the project, we hadn't anticipated necessarily, but they, when we had to work on policy, for instance, we got their input about terms of policy on their schools, at their schools, what, was working, what did they think was important. Same thing for prevention, what kind of prevention programming was going on at their schools. And they got a chance to hear from each other what the other schools were doing as well. And again, it was students of all genders. And so an opportunity for them to kind of interact in important ways too. Again, that we would connect with healthy masculinity as well.
Yeah, and it was a paid position too, which
Yes.
I think is important for the students and the sort of youth development principles of just not relying on free labor in that way. I mean, not that it's labor, but
yeah, but well, it was labor.
I mean, it was labor, but it wasn't.
But that wasn't
too super exploitative.
No, it wasn't.
But it was important that they were paid for the important work they were doing on their campus.
Well, and in terms of rules of exchange, right? We had a contract with them, specified the number of hours that they would work the labor, and laid out kind of all the parameters in terms of that, which was important, I think. And one reason it worked was because of those rules of exchange, because I know some of the other grantees were trying to work with students and were really struggling. And I think the reason we were able to do it was that we weren't thinking of that social exchange theory when we were doing it, but really that would explain why it worked in terms of those rules of exchange. So we're going to welcome Jeremy now, who has been tracking some of the responses, questions that have come up. And so welcome, Jeremy.
Hi, everyone.
Sorry to interrupt, Jeremy. I just wanted to say one last thing about the tag, which is that they also helped us to conduct and set up focus groups. So we got a good sense of, they did focus groups around what the actual knowledge of sexual misconduct policy and what the different things that were being done on the campuses, what students' knowledge of those things were. So we got a good sense of just how much of the work that was being done was something that students actually were even aware of.
Yep. Great.
And I would just add to that, Greerlin, I just want to echo that the technical advisory group was one of my favorite parts of the project, and it's for, not only everything that you've spoke to, but really how, they contributed their perspective and its uniqueness in evolving, existence shaped how the project evolved in a really significant way across the board as well.
So Jeremy worked on the project as well, if that's not clear.
Yeah. So hi everyone, Jeremy from Men Can Stop Rape. I'm also a training and technical assistance manager. So I've just got some questions for you all as we bring the conversation to a close. The most recent one that came in, I'm just going to read it out loud. So it says, who in the university is involved to get the network moving? I found there is much disconnect from campus to campus. So how would you all want to just take that question and run with it?
I think in terms of for us, we were fortunate in that we had relationships with really all these campuses before we started this project, that we'd worked with all of them in one way or another for many, many years, which, although one of the challenges is that there's a lot of turnover on the campuses, as everybody knows. So I think in some cases it was, process of continually building new relationships, but there really were different offices, different departments. There were in some cases, I think a lot of times it was with prevention staff, Title IX person. Y'all, who else would you suggest?
One of the things that we had been challenged by when we were doing reporting was that there was this sort of assumption within the reporting that there was just sort of one office that was the same at every university that we'd be interacting with. And that just wasn't the case. So, we had to think of, this is basically the closest approximation to what that campus has, because, one campus may have a task force that has been created by like a memorandum from the president, whereas another one is just, a prevention office that's just doing that work because that's what they want to do or because that's what they have to do, but they're not collaborating as a part of a CCR the way that, say, another campus may be. So in some cases, it was working with the CCR. In some cases, it was working with the prevention office. In some cases, it was working with student conduct. Yeah. In some cases, it was working with whatever the closest approximation for like the Center for Diversity and Inclusion is, So it just depends on like where you could find people who were willing to sort of invest and engage with the project and, agree to those rules.
I would say in terms of our initial contacts, it was through prevention and Title IX. Those were the most consistently kind of the places where we made initial contact. Although wellness centers too, I think some wellness centers, health centers as well. Those are actually probably the three consistent ones.
Awesome. I'm going to jump us to the next question too. So this is focusing on, how does COVID affect the ways for a regional network like the one that was formed by this project to continue staying connected to each other and doing the work? How does it impact sexual assault programming for the fall?
That is really a great question. And in terms of how it affects it, I don't think we have an answer for that at this point, but I will say that one of the things we were able to do is bring together actually this is going to happen tomorrow, that the project ended, but we still have contacts at all the campuses. There's an email list that still exists. We are in touch with the campuses some of the time. So one of the things we're able to do is reach out to the campuses, set up a call tomorrow, a Zoom call tomorrow with the various campuses, and including some that weren't in the original network, and to ask and talk about that very issue. And I don't think they've had necessarily in any kind of organized way the opportunity to do that. So we're looking forward to it because I think we want to learn as well what the campuses, what kind of challenges the campuses are facing. I know, you know, at least my sense is campuses are approaching, well, I don't even know that they know exactly how they're approaching it. I know from talking to Jane that American is approaching it one way. My wife, who teaches at George Washington University, they're approaching it another way, although they haven't quite sorted it out yet. So we're really happy and glad to be able to organize that call, and that would not have happened. I guarantee it would not have happened. We would not have been able to do it without this regional network having existed through this project.
I think something I would add is that there's a positive coming out of these times. These are not positive times by any means, don't get me wrong, but we're all getting more comfortable with these kind of conversations and Zoom calls and that sort of thing, where in the past this network often met in person, which sometimes was hard for people to travel or get off campus to go to some of the group meetings, or conference calls, which are like the bane of my existence, or like email listservs, which now it just feels so much easier from these last few months just to jump on a Zoom call and have a conversation. So I think that's a positive coming out of this. And I also think, at least on my campus, I can only speak to, but we've had a couple events like webinars about the Title IX regs. And I've been doing some videos about some of the survey data that I'm crunching, and people log in and people show up, and we would never get that many people on an on-campus event because there's always so many things going on. So we've actually been able to engage with students a little bit more in these times. For now, we'll see how it goes moving forward, but I think we can be really creative about how using these video conferencing technologies to continue resource sharing, ideas, connections across the campuses.
I think that's a really important point. I mean, what I'm hearing you say is this may be an opportune moment to actually build a regional campus network in your area. It might be easier to do now than it would have been earlier. And I'm thinking of a state group coalition where they had a Zoom meeting for the first time, and they had so many people participating not all of them could sign in, which they had never had that in person.
Right.
Never had that in person.
I mean, of course, there are some barriers, right? To
Yes.
like bandwidth and access and that sort of thing. But I think it is an opportunity. And I think that we need each other's help more than ever in this work, because students aren't on campus in the same way, or haven't been on campus, but are still struggling with these issues.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
You want to do one more question?
Yeah, let's do one more.
Well, Jane, I'm really glad that you brought up the Title IX regs, because that dovetails with this next question, which is sort of how a regional network like the one that we're talking about might be useful for responding to and understanding the Title IX regs that are coming out.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's right. I think that the more heads together, the better, really, with anything. But with more than 2,000 pages of regs, and universities, I'm talking generally, not specifically, universities generally are a little nervous about like how to move forward. And if, like we said earlier, if they hear that other universities are doing certain things, they have a little bit more confidence in also doing that. And so I'm being very vague, but coming together to brainstorm with general counsel and that sort of thing to figure out how to move forward will be really important, both in COVID-19 times and the new Title IX regulations.
I also want to say, in terms of the project, I think not the last one's regulations, but one of our partners on the project was able to sort of help to educate the campuses and understand what some of the changes potentially coming down the pipeline would mean, and what were some of the best ways to sort of voice what their reservations were. So that was one of the benefits of the network, is sort of being able to sort of, as it happened, educate people and tell them the best ways to go about voicing what their concerns may be, what their questions are,
Yeah.
what things that they're interested in about.
Yeah, and our partners, Cleary, Altruistic, the Network for Victim Recovery DC, all played valuable roles in terms of addressing policy issues and prevention, which is what the sexual assault policy and prevention, which is what the project focused on. But the thing that we're talking about here makes me realize, or make me think, that it's not only an opportunity for campuses to come together, but also in collaboration with the campuses, the organizations that a lot of them work with and that support the campuses as well. So, that everybody can come together and have those kinds of conversations, Jane, that you're talking about, that we've had today, or that we're looking forward to having tomorrow. From Men Can Stop Rape's perspective, those conversations, there's a reason we use the word conversation. It's incredibly important. So Jane and Greerlin, thanks so much for being part of this conversation today. And Jeremy, thanks for all your support. And thanks to everybody out there who joined us. Again, if you want to support the conversations, there's a donation link that Jeremy is hopefully or probably sending out right now as we speak. So, please feel free to send any amount if you are able, but we will keep having these conversations and look forward to you joining us in the future. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.